always identify the date when we do these. It's November the 10th, 2020. And that's important because the way the world is changing these days, you need to know when that information was available and where you heard it and all of those kinds of things. So we welcome you here today. Our topic is resilience over recovery, safeguarding your business during economic turbulence. And I believe that everyone can agree to the economic turbulence that we have been through in the last few months. Every business has had to react to that differently. And none of us, not a one of us, was given a playbook of what to do next. And so we're rewriting it as we go. You know, there's a lot to worry about these days, and it's beyond what you used to have to worry about. It was normally your company's products or your services and figuring out how to continue to grow your customer base, and with all that, business was challenging enough. But now companies have had to deal with economic and environmental forces that are far beyond what we ever anticipated. And then you have the fact that you have a change in the economic cycle. And what has that done to your cash flow? What has that done to your access to credit? Have your customers been rattled, and your suppliers, and even the survival of your organization may have been threatened during these times. And today we're going to hear from three different speakers that are actually from Bank of America. And Bank of America happens to be our corporate sponsor for Caffeinated Conversations this month. But we're going to hear from Will Manning, who's a Senior Vice President for Business Banking and a market executive for Global Banking and Markets. Boy, you got a good title. And then we have Kathleen Ferguson. She's a VP for Business Banking Relationship and a Business Banking Relationship Manager, Global Banking and Markets. And we have Jason Sawinski, who's a Vice President for Small Business Banker for Consumer and Small Business. And these folks are all in our market. So they will be even available after this presentation if you have follow-up questions for them. And generally speaking, we're going to talk about cash flow today. We're going to talk about credit, survival training, and how to deal with expenses. And so I think we'll be off to a good start. Kathleen, I'd like to start with you to have you start the discussion today. Give us kind of a high-level overview of how our state and region have been impacted by this pandemic.
Sure. Thank you, David, for that introduction. We appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. So you couldn't have said it better, right? So businesses already have a lot to think about, and then all of a sudden we've got this pandemic. And only if somebody had a crystal ball to let us know that was going to happen, we could have planned better. But the reality is there's always things constant in our economy, things in our environment that are changing that can impact our business. And it just comes out of nowhere. So I'm going to share with you today some early on stats around what happened with South Carolina and Aiken County. So there were three industries that were mostly impacted. All industries were impacted, but these were the three top in South Carolina. As you can imagine, leisure and hospitality being the top, manufacturing and healthcare. In fact, Tourism Economics reported that the visitor spending was down between February and April over 2019 by $768 million, and food and beverage was down by $192 million. It's estimated that the total loss this year in revenue for tourism for South Carolina will be around 50%. As the pandemic was surging and we had the mandate for closing businesses, South Carolina unemployment rate rose from 2.5% in February to 12.8% in April. While Aiken County fared a little better, it was in line with the state at 9.9%. With shutdowns, job losses, Aiken County also experienced spending also declining much as the nation did. Sales tax collections dropped by 13% between March and May of this year. But there's some good news. Despite all these hurdles, with the reopening of businesses and mandates lifted, there's been some positive signs. Aiken County's unemployment rate, believe it or not, get ready to hear it, dropped to 3.4% in September. It also experienced growth in single-family housing, reporting 22.7 million in August compared to last year of 18.5 million. But you know, the reality is there's so much unknown in the volatility with COVID and the economics, that the impact that this can have. And we got to continue to plan for that. And it's going to be a tough challenge ahead. So the question for many of us on this phone call and in the business community is, how do we recover and stay resilient?
Kathleen, that's some really interesting information. I'd like to echo the housing. It is counterintuitive, but in Aiken, in April, May, June, July, August, and September, we broke residential housing sales records. And I think that's happening in other places too, but that underpins the economy. That helps a lot. And then this drop in employment again to one of the lowest unemployment numbers in South Carolina means we're right back in the position again of having jobs without people. And so it's very positive. I think it's leaning positive, and I believe folks are moving in a positive direction right now. So Will, let's turn to you a minute. As business owners, managers look over these ever-changing conditions, what do you think they should be on the lookout for?
David, thank you again for this opportunity to share in these caffeinated conversations. And it's been a pleasure getting to know you and your team, our common background. But as to the question of how business owners should weather these conditions, it's all about preparation. Business owners should really consider keeping up with the trends, the forecasts in their specific industry, following the broader assessments of economic outlook. Really, three things for me come to mind, David, and you and Kathy. Kathy really elaborated on a lot. Number one is economic outlook. She talked to you and you just elaborated a little bit more about housing. You talked about the leisure, manufacturing industry. Those business owners should stay abreast of those economic industry and outlook trends. And your organization does a fantastic job of providing those resources for those business owners. Number two, I would say that the business owners should focus on the safety of their employees. Many of them have made the changes that are necessary, instituting masks, protective shields, hand sanitizers. Those have been the basics. They've had to make changes around their shifts and the hours of operation, but really taking care of the most important asset of any organization, and that's the employee. And then thirdly, focusing and taking a look on that business's operations, focusing on their efficiency. For example, in times past where business owners may have used paper checks or received paper checks and made those deposits by visiting a financial institution and standing in line. Things are different now. So you can take and deposit those checks with the efficiency of a remote scanner. Many businesses have made tweaks in their operations in moving to online ordering, have made tweaks around moving to drive-through and drive-up processes. So those are really three things that the business owners can focus in on: staying abreast of the economic outlook, taking care of their people and their employees, and really focusing on their operations to really help them weather the industry changes.
Some very good points there, Will. So Kathleen, as business owners respond to these current conditions, what is a challenge that they might face, and what steps should they keep in mind?
Sure, that's a good question. With any business, cash flow is the most important aspect of every business when you think about it. It's the lifeline. It's what keeps you alive during both good and bad times. So you've got to keep an eye on it. You've got to manage it. So there's a saying, cash is king. Why? Because companies with great products, loyal customers can still falter without sufficient cash to meet payroll, pay suppliers, or even just keep the lights on. And quite a few businesses have experienced that during this pandemic. So you got to get an immediate handle on your company's daily cash. It's going to be essential to the livelihood of your business. And you should monitor that. You can do that daily, weekly, or monthly. The more that you analyze it and project your cash flow, the better understanding you're going to have for any potential disruptions or operations that you may have. And then you can take an immediate action on it. So there's some questions you can ask yourself during temporary shortfalls. Many businesses will think sometimes, I think about the pandemic, and there was probably times where people couldn't get to the bank or just really trying to figure out what was going on. And so they really need to have discussions with their banker. Do they have overdraft protection? Can they help them align their credit payments to their company's billing cycle? Speak with your banker frequently, your advisors frequently, but guess what? You need to also speak to your customers and suppliers. There's things that could happen in their business that ultimately affects yours. So communication is key. That's in any relationship. So make sure to keep the communication open, and also monitor your clients' paying habits, right? So if you've got clients that start to falter and fall behind, how often are they doing that? Stay on top of it. The more that you talk with them and probe, the better it's going to be, and you can be proactive.
Yeah, I agree with all you're saying. I don't think people realize it, but the chamber also has to operate like a business. And so before March ended, we were sitting down doing cash flow projections with numerous scenarios to say, what if? And we have certainly monitored our cash like you're advising all businesses to do, because that's really the important part, is not to get caught in a crunch. So Will, what would be another step that a business owner can take to get ahead in this economic downturn?
Yeah, David, I'd say the next step would be to assess your credit situation. Kathy talked about cash is king. Credit can be a lifesaver during challenging financial times. We've seen data during the recessions of back in 1990, 91, 2001, and we're going to likely see the results of this latest downturn, in that the growth rate for commercial banking loans dropped to nearly zero. And that was data out of the Federal Reserve Bank out of St. Louis. And so in difficult times and in a difficult economy, lenders like ourselves and many others are going to be very, very cautious about companies that we don't know very well. In fact, many of your bankers, many of the financial institutions like to assess from the management team and for the company, have they been able to perform well over various business cycle? During good times, have they made good capital expenditures to continue to drive and support growth? During downturns, have they responded well, making the necessary changes around efficiency? And knowing that that business has been able to weather those challenges really allows the lender to have confidence and extend credit. So there's 6 things that we like to position to our business owners to consider. And these are the things that the financial institutions will consider. Number 1 is capacity. Does your business have the capacity, the financial capacity, to support debt and expenses? Some companies will say, well, I've got enough money to make my mortgage or my loan payment. But what you need to understand is that typically a business needs to have about $1.25 of income to support every $1 of debt service. So in essence, that 25 cents of difference provides a cushion for that business to absorb unexpected expenses or downturns in the economy. If you think about it, David, think about businesses that took out loans just a year ago. Who would have thought how differently things would have been within 1 year? And you think about that 25-cent cushion. Imagine how prudent that, if you think about that maxim now, how that feels. And that's why that cushion is there. So the next thing is, in assessing the credit situation, is to think about capital. Does a business own any capital assets, cash, equipment? Is there enough to help support the financing that they may want? Those are some of the things that they need to think about. Number 3 is collateral, the collateral for the business. So accounts receivable, inventory, cash, equipment, commercial real estate. All of those are forms of collateral that banks will leverage to secure the loans. And as we look at that collateral, we'll make sure we're working with the owners that there's no existing debt to owe on the collateral. We'll make sure we get to a net position there. The 4th area we'd ask that they focus on is the conditions. And we talked about this before, the state of the economy, trends in the industry, all those things Kathleen mentioned at the very beginning. Number 5, and I think this is the most important, is the character, the work experience, the experience in that industry of that business owner, and personal credit history are all character traits that the banks really monitor closely. That business owner's personal integrity, their good standing in the community, really that business owner's personal credit score, you'd be surprised at how much that their own personal credit history, the individual as well as the business, tells about that organization. And so focusing on elements around character and good standing and good reputation are critically important for us. And then lastly, communication. Kathy mentioned it earlier. the business owner's ability and willingness to openly communicate with us, let their banker, let their financial institution and their advisors know about what's going on, what are the challenges, because together we can put together a plan to work through those situations.
Well, those are 6 great points. And I'd like to remind those that are listening that this is being recorded and the link will be available later. And some of this stuff you'll probably want to go back over and hear these 6 points again and think about how that applies to your business. So Kathleen, we've heard a lot about the steps to take as businesses experience this disruption in cash flow and access to credit and everything else. But what do you suggest that business owners do if they're feeling that the survival of their organization is threatened? What steps should they take?
Sure. You mentioned earlier the chamber going through steps and scenarios with their cash flow. So very much the same aspect with your cash flow. You want to take your company through survival training, give it different scenarios of what if, then what's going to happen next, right? So think about this. What if a cyber attack takes down your website, a key employee leaves your firm, or even a natural disaster strikes? Your company's everyday operations can be threatened. And the risk to that is greater than most may think. So it's particularly could be more even, more devastating during economic stressful times. So thinking back about 2019, the U.S. experienced 6 climate and weather catastrophes. And with each of those, there was $1 billion lost each time. But here's a key thing to note. 1 in 4 small businesses fail to reopen after a natural disaster. So you have to prepare for how your company can withstand these challenges and these unknown circumstances. So yes, it's unknown, but just think about what if, because it can happen. We're not shielded to these things happening to us. So here's some questions you can ask yourself should something happen, just like with the pandemic. Do you have digital access? How are you going to manage and monitor your bank accounts and financial reporting? Even going to paying your vendors and employees. And there's still employees out there who probably don't have checking accounts. How are you going to get the funds to them? Do you have a line of credit in case you're unable to make deposits to cover your disbursements? Have you had those conversations that Will and I were talking about with your banker and your advisors, keeping them up to date, keeping them abreast of things so that you can strategize together? Employees that are paying or traveling, how are you going to pay them? What are the emergency needs that come up that they may need quick access to? And even thinking about the pandemic now, an alternative work site. So many of us had to go to a work at home state. Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared to put your employees in another facility? What kind of supplies or equipment will you need? These are all things that you need to think of. And then so with all that information, as you build upon that, you can build a business continuity plan. And then it's important as you build it to know where you're going to maintain it, who's going to have access to it, who will help you implement it, and just making sure all your contacts are updated so that when that happens, you can make that initial call and have a call tree in place to get that information funneled down throughout your whole organization. This is just hitting the surface of it, but I do believe it's key that every company should have a business continuity plan, and taking your company through survival training will help you build that plan.
Well, I just imagine that a year ago, not as many companies they should have had that continuity plan were prepared, but as they have worked through the last 6 or 7 months, I would presume that people are making notes and writing these plans so that they can easily flip the switch and switch back and forth as the need arises. We hope that it won't arise again anytime soon, but it's better to be prepared. You've made that great point. So Will and Jason, I just imagine you have some other advice that you'd like to give, and I'd like to start with Will. What else is on your mind?
Yeah, Kathy covered it thoroughly, David, but I'll just say, in addition, just automate where possible. I mean, the digital economy is here. I mean, I'm holding up a device. Everyone now has it. And COVID has just accelerated everything with respect to digital adoption. An estimated 45% of the jobs now performed by people in the United States at a cost of about $2 trillion could be automated with the technology that we already have today. So just think about that. 45% of the jobs with the technology that we have could be automated. And so this adoption is going incredibly fast. So administrative tasks like payroll, other record keeping can often be digitized at minimal cost. You can work with your bankers to do that, or various software providers. But I would just say, as the business owners make those evaluations, just be careful when it comes to reducing headcount. Automation is an opportunity really to retrain that workforce and help them focus in areas that are more value added to the business. So moving from maybe something administrative to more sales or more operational. So not just eliminating the headcount, but we're redeploying.
That's a very good point. So Jason, we haven't heard from you yet. You're a small business banker, and to give you an idea, you probably already know this, but the AikenChamber has 1,000 businesses that are members. 680 of those businesses, 680 of our members have 10 or fewer employees. So we are a small business organization, and I imagine people are leaning forward now to hear what you've got to say.
Well, great. I appreciate the time. I've been patiently waiting, so thank you. So one of the biggest things I guess I would recommend is making sure businesses keep tabs on their expenses. During the Great Recession of 08, 09, nearly 75% of company leaders identified cost cutting as a top priority. However, one of the key things to keep in mind is trimming expenses across the board during a crisis can also backfire. So instead, you kind of want to take stock of your processes that you've got now, from your front line to your back office functions, and kind of determine what savings might be possible when needed. And then you want to kind of make a plan for what to cut, maybe work through some sort of what if scenarios ahead of the downturn, and determine what's going to be the least painful and then most effective cost cutting reductions. Consider negotiating agreements with your suppliers, adjusting payment terms to align with your revenue cycles. We've also got some great resources to help our small business owners out too. We've got our global banking site that's at www.bofaml.com. And then we've got our small business community, which, yes, you pulled up. Great. Thank you. Our small business community, it's smallbusinessonlinecommunity.bankofamerica.com/welcome, which I guess that'll be shared later. But in particular, there's coronavirus resources, what you need to know for your small business. That's got some great articles on there just to kind of help a wide variety of scenarios and different type of business owners. We know that business owners are confronted with unprecedented financial challenges due to COVID-19. We've constantly developing articles to help navigate through these times. And we've got, an excellent team of small business writers to help provide guidance on anything from remote workforce management, social media tactics, how to host virtual seminars, and much more advice to help small businesses. So make sure you check it out frequently too, because as everything is continuously changing, we're always updating articles to make sure they're most appropriate for the time.
Well, very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're sort of nearing the end of this program, and your information has been very relevant. Things that can be easily applied or thought through. And we've also had a few questions come in when people knew that this was going to be the topic today. So I'm just going to throw them out as a jump ball, and whoever knows the answer, if you will step in and answer, that would be helpful. This says, I'm a struggling business owner during this economic downturn. Would you recommend that we continue our current marketing campaign or invest in some other kind of effort to promote our revenue, to build our revenue, I guess?
Hey, David, it's Kathleen. I'll take that one. I'm going to start off with the word, it depends. Invest in your company is good. However, it's important to consider a few things. Do you have a strategic marketing plan that outlines your targeted market and aligns to your customer buying habits? With the pandemic, those behaviors have changed. So do you understand those behaviors? How has it impacted your business? Do you understand your current financial position? So going back to the monitoring of your cash flow, your expenses, how does that all align? Where's the money coming from to invest? All those things are important when you think about your marketing plan and investing further. What's the projected return going to be and the time frame for breaking even and making a profit? So regardless, before making that final decision, I would advise you to meet again with your CPA, banker, advisors to ensure you're considering all the benefits and risks based on your unique business plan and position.
Okay. Anyone else want to add to that answer? Okay. All right, so here's the second question. What are some specific examples of where I can decrease my expenses to increase my profit?
Sure. Good morning. I'll take that one. So one of the biggest things I would recommend would be reviewing your payables and finding ways of cutting out discretionary or even unnecessary expenses. You'd be surprised how many you'd find once you start digging into that. Try to eliminate manual processes and automate or integrate them when you can to help reduce cost, and also help to free up. That would also help to free up time to devote to more profitable initiatives. Evaluate your energy efficiency practices, and hopefully help reduce some of your utility costs. Simple initiatives such as keeping an eye on overhead expenses like your rent and travel, and then shopping around for competitive prices with suppliers can help make a big difference too.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And again, the AikenChamber has had to do some of those same things. That's been one of the unintended consequences of what's going on now, as we have seen some of our expenses reduced without us trying to. Our building was closed all during the summer except for the few offices, and so our utility bill went down considerably. That was savings. We haven't been to any conferences or workshops or meetings out of town since March, and that's produced savings. And I think that's what you're talking about, is there, look at every item and say, how has this been impacted, and do we really need this in the future? So here's another question. What is the main challenge business owners may need to overcome during recovery? What do you think is the main challenge?
David, I'll take that one. This is Will. I'd reiterate what Kathleen said at the very beginning. It's all about cash flow. That cash flow is the lifeline of the business, and so it is the central challenge for businesses, because it is generally the top reason that a small business is going to fail during good and bad times. So, going back to the points we discussed earlier, plan for the shortfalls, forecast wisely as best you can in an environment like this. Jason stated it earlier, stay engaged with your customers and suppliers. Obviously, customers bringing in the revenue, but suppliers for the payables. I mean, you want to negotiate the best types of terms as possible at this time. And don't hesitate to leverage your CPA, your accountant, and your banker. I mean, we're here to help, and there's a lot of wisdom that we can share, and that for the benefit of those business owners. And then additional resources that you shared earlier, Jason shared earlier, the websites that we have that are going to be available to all your members here, but BofA.com, and then the small business banking community at bankofamerica.com. Those are some resources that can help those owners.
So here's another question, and I think this is on a lot of people's mind. How in the world, with so many unknowns, do I set a budget for 2021?
Hey, David, I'll take that. So that's a really good question, because everyone's been affected differently. And so I would say that when you're planning for 2021, create a rolling 12-month budget. That is a living document, so you can review it and update it monthly based on your actual experience and performance, because that could change, right? So you don't want it to be a fixed budget. You want it to live with what your business is doing. And again, thinking about buying behaviors and other impacts from the economy, that's going to constantly change, right? There's such an unknown now. So where do you start? So the first thing I would say is to do a forecast of your sales, right? So and use a budgeting tool or spreadsheet that's going to allow you to easily access it and make those changes as you need to. And some people are like, where do I go with that though? How do I forecast it? I don't know what's going to happen. And that's for everybody. So I would say if you're not feeling too confident how to do that, there's three options. So you could, one, if you're having a great 2020, as we have seen some businesses have this year and feeling optimistic, you could take your results from this year and set your budget, maybe increase your sales up to 10%. Or perhaps it's safer to stay level with what you've done for 2020. And then some will choose to review their 2019 results and use that as a base and budget from there, and maybe increase from 10 to 20%. So it's really going to depend though. I go back and I think about the buying behaviors, right? So that's changed for most businesses. How are your customers, your clients, how are they buying? How will that affect your business? Will you need to invest more? Will you need to make any product changes? Earlier, the question about marketing, how much more in marketing will you need to invest in, or even technology, right? Jason and Will talked about automation and integration. How much of that would be helpful in your business? So taking all those things into consideration, and more than ever, you've got to track. So we said, keep your eyes on cash flow. Same thing, keep your eyes, that's related to sales, so keep your eyes on your sales trends and your industry, and just really understand what's happening within your business and your industry and how that's affecting the buying habits of your clients, so that you can have a better forecast for yourself. So in that aspect, you need to make sure your sales goals are flexible and your expenses are flexible and scalable. And so Jason talked about monitoring that on a regular basis. The chamber did it. So you've got your fixed cost expenses, and you can potentially renegotiate those, but variable, that those can change monthly. And so make sure to keep an eye on your expenses, cut back where you can, but also think about the unknown expenses. Again, going back, maybe you're having a growth period in your company. Are you going to have to hire new employees? What is that cost associated with recruiting those employees, with training them, the benefits associated? As we've talked with companies in the community, one of the things that tends to be a challenge across many industries is hiring talent and retaining it. So many companies are reviewing their benefits package. So take in consideration the expenses that you may not normally consider. And again, thinking about how can I improve my margins, when you're looking at your sales goals, align those margins, and maybe they're products that should be cut out, and you should focus on something that's more profitable for the company. So there's a lot to consider. Again, I'm going to go back and say, make sure to bring in your CPA, your banker. If you need to hire an outside consultant, you can do that too. But again, communication and seeking the advice and help of some expertise could be helpful in setting your budget.
Yeah, I think the thought of a rolling budget is certainly what we're going to have to do to just see, are we coming out of this at the end of the first quarter? Are we coming out of it at the end of the second quarter? And I've always operated under a pretty specific and tight budget, but I think I'm going to have to change for right now to get through things. So Kathleen, we talked about this before we started, so I want the audience to know that I'm not catching Kathleen flat-footed now, but is there a bow that you can tie around today's discussion and kind of summarize the things that we've talked about?
Sure. There were so many best practices and pieces that we shared, but to just surmise it, put a summary together of it, the key thing to me, and both Will and I touched on it, is cash flow. It is, again, the number one reason why a business will fail during good and bad times. So make sure that you're monitoring that, keeping your eye on it, and along with your budget and forecasting, make sure that you're constantly reviewing that and making the necessary adjustments so that you can be proactive versus reactive. So that all entails looking at your expenses as well, constantly monitor those. We're just in unprecedented times, and it's just constantly changing. So it's really important leaving from here that you know that nothing is set in stone, and that it's a living, breathing document environment that we're living in, and you just have to change with it, and you have to be ready and prepared. So the more that you plan for it, and the more that you put your focus around your financial performance around it, the more control you're going to have over the success. So it's a matter of, do I succeed or do I fail? And it's really going to boil down to the management of your company, and keeping your eye on cash flow and what you have in place from an operations standpoint, and being able to be proactive versus reactive.
Well, I think you captured that very well. It's been a great discussion. And I know that folks have appreciated it. We've had Will Manning, we've had Kathleen Ferguson, we've had Jason Sawinski as our guest today on Caffeinated Conversations. We thank Bank of America for being our corporate sponsor for the month. And we thank the three of you for your knowledge and advice that you provided us today. And we're over and out.